Class is now in session. I'm Professor Hockey, and today we'll be discussing Game 3 of the Stanley Cup Western Conference Finals, in which the Sharks technically defeated the St. Louis Blues 5-4. I will get into the major point of this video, which is of course what I have in a square on this board, the officiating, a bit later, but I'll quickly move through the goals and how this game went on. So the Blues started off as the better team for the first few minutes of the first period, but eventually the Sharks just completely took over. A first goal by Erik Karlsson in these playoffs in the first period, as well as Joe Thornton getting on the board, and the Sharks had a 2-0 lead by the end of the first period. What we've seen a couple of times in the series against the Colorado Avalanche, the Sharks blow 2-goal leads, and they do a very similar thing here in this second period. While the Sharks are the much better team, actually, for the start of the second, the first half of it, you could probably say, and the Sharks do get another goal on the board from Joe Thornton, the Blues actually managed to get two of their own from Steen and Tarasenko on just simple rushes the other way. At the halfway mark, that's when the Blues start to take over. They start just making tons of great plays. The Sharks just making tons of uncharacteristically poor passes and turnovers on everything like that. And the Blues add a couple more goals in the second period, both from Perron, one on the power play, and a 4-goal period for the Blues gives them a 4-3 lead at the end of 40 minutes. So the Sharks in a similar position as they were in Game 2 when they were down 1 goal going into the third period, but this time the Sharks actually managed to tie the game. Even though early in this third period the Sharks aren't getting too much on Binnington, just a couple chances here or there, and the Blues are getting a couple of very good chances on Martin Jones. Jones stands tall, and eventually the persistence pays off, and it's Logan Couture's 14th of these playoffs that ties the game and forces an overtime. The Blues' third overtime of these playoffs, they are 1-1, and the Sharks' fourth overtime of these playoffs, they are 2-1. However, the Blues had won their most recent overtime, Game 7, against the Stars, and the Sharks had lost their most recent one, Game 6, against the Avalanche. So that's when we get to overtime, and there are a couple chances either way before Erik Karlsson gets his second of this game, second of these playoffs, and gets the victory for the Sharks. And that brings me into the main point of this video, which is the officiating. So I'll first start off with the first major missed call of this game, because it mostly all came from missed calls, and that was the most obvious delay of game penalty of all time. Normally, when it comes to delay of game penalties, these are very close. There is a stick in the way. You're trying to decide whether or not it went off of a stick. Maybe sometimes it comes really close to the tip of the glass. You're wondering if it deflected there. The refs and linesmen meet, and honestly, more often than not, they do seem to get the call correct, which I'm mostly surprised about. But this time, a stick is maybe 2 feet away from the puck when David Perron clears this one over. And this is sort of a turning point in the game. Not that this missed penalty caused the Sharks to just become terrible in the second period, but this was sort of right after this, the Sharks just started playing horrifically, and so this is ends up being a pretty big missed call, and it's a wonder how the referees somehow managed to miss this, and not just the referees, but also the linesmen as they all convene at center ice to decide this. The second missed call is on on Sammy Blais, who ends up getting a hit to the head on Justin Braun, with a referee within maybe 3 feet of this play, standing right next to it, looking directly at the play, and yet somehow not even a 2-minute penalty for a check to the head is assessed. Most people are of the belief that Sammy Blais is now going to be suspended for a game due to this hit to the head, and yet nothing is called by the referees. Another terrible missed call. But all of that does not even compare to what happens in the overtime. The Sharks fans felt as though, personally as well, that Game 2 was poorly called for the Sharks, that Game 3, obviously in regulation, poorly called for the Sharks as well. But all of that goes out the window with what happened in this overtime period. Timo Meier gets his hand on this puck, a clear-cut hand pass to Gustav Nyquist, who then gives it to Karlsson to get the overtime game-winning goal. I have no idea how the referees somehow managed to miss this. They're 7 or 8 feet away. There's one who's looking directly at it. Another one is obviously in the back. This is a clear-cut hand pass that, of course, cannot be reviewed. It's actually quite similar to a goal that was scored by the Boston Bruins against the Sharks back in the regular season when I think it was Chris Wagner knocks down the puck with a clear-cut high stick, then bats it in. And since technically he bats it in after hitting it with the high stick, it's not reviewable play, and the Sharks get burned by that in that one. But that, of course, a regular season game-tying goal does not come close to comparing a Game 3 in the Western Conference Final overtime game-winning goal. And it was the Blues getting burned, and the Sharks end up getting the rewards of that. But it's just unbelievable how the referees can miss this. 3 times in these playoffs, fans have been saying that the Sharks have been gifted the game by the referees, but I haven't really felt that for the first couple of times. The Game 7 one from the Golden Knights, yes, it probably shouldn't have been a major, but the Golden Knights gave up 4 goals on that power play. It definitely did themselves no favors in holding themselves in that game. And Game 7 against the Avalanche, yes, the offside was, pretty unlucky because of the fact that Landeskog is not at all in this play, but by the letter of the law, he is offside, and so of course the goal should come back due to the fact that you can review offside calls. But this is definitely the first one in which the Sharks absolutely steal this victory with this goal. Would they have maybe won anyway, or would the Blues have won? Who knows? But this goal should never actually have counted, and because the hand pass is unreviewable, this ends up actually being the game winner. So just a complete disgrace from the referees. They end up taking the 2 referees from the Vegas series out of the playoffs because they didn't like the 5-minute major. I didn't really agree with that. But if they are to take the 2 referees out of this of the playoffs for this game, I would be 100% for it, because I have no idea how you can miss the most obvious delay of game penalty of all time, a clear check to the head, and then a hand pass on the game-winning goal in overtime that ends up putting the Sharks up 2-1 in this series. It's a complete disgrace for the NHL, and I wonder, now the Sharks have been involved in multiple situations in these playoffs that might make the NHL rethink their rules, whether or not they can review 5-minute major calls, whether or not they should continue to review offside calls, and now whether or not you should be able to review any goal scored in the overtime for the playoffs, because of the potential that there is something completely wrong. So the Sharks get away with highway robbery in this one, and they lead the series 2-1. Next, I'll talk about Martin Jones, who took a lot of criticism for this game, having let in 4 goals in this second period. I wasn't upset with really any of these goals necessarily. The Tarasenko and the first Perron one were just absolute rockets. The only ones that you would like to see him potentially stop would be the first Steen one and the second Perron one, the goals that made it 2-1 and then 4-3 for the Blues. The Steen one is obviously a tough save to make, but it reminds me of the Sundqvist one that made it 4-2 the other game, where, your team is up 2-0, it's pretty early in the second period, you want to hold the lead, and it's not an easy save, but you probably want to see Jones try and make that one. And then the one late in the period from Perron on the power play, a slap shot from the point, does of course be screened by Braun and then deflects off of the left leg of Justin Braun, but it is a relatively high up deflection, and so I think if Jones is maybe a slightly more focused in this situation, he might be able to adjust on the fly and make this save anyways. So not the best second period for Martin Jones, but it was sort of like a tale of 2 games here, because in the first period he made a few good saves, and in the third period especially, when the Sharks still trailing by 1 goal for the majority of it, he makes multiple key saves on Tarasenko, on Shen, on Perron for the hat trick that allows the Sharks to stay alive in this game. So it ended up all in all being a pretty solid game for Martin Jones in the end. Next, I'll talk about Joe Thornton. Of course, I mentioned him in both Games 1 and Game 2, saying that he looked slow. He was playing a pretty poor defensive game in general, but tonight he completely turned that around. He looked like a completely different player, gets 2 goals and an assist in this one, the assist on the game-tying goal from Logan Couture. He looked a lot better defensively, had some better defensive zone coverage, even when the rest of the team was sort of breaking down late in that second period. So Thornton, I don't know what happened to him. Maybe this was just a good game for him. Maybe the change to line mates, which I'll get to basically right now, helped him out. But again, he looked a lot better in this game. And next I will get to those line changes. So coming into this game, Sorensen actually gets healthy scratched. So this is actually the first time in these playoffs since the first couple games against the Golden Knights where DeBoer has, purposely healthy scratched a player who could potentially be in the lineup, honestly enough, because Donskoy was scratched for those first couple games against the Golden Knights in favor of Michael Haley. But since then, it's mostly just been injuries keeping players out of the lineup. I don't really count healthy scratching someone like Redill or Gambrell as forcefully keeping a player who should be in the lineup out of the lineup. But this is the first time that DeBoer decides, you know what, Sorensen hasn't been good enough. Let's keep him on the sidelines, which I was surprised about. I wasn't surprised that he'd be taken off the third line, and Melker Karlsson going in front of him does make sense, as Karlsson is the most defensively responsible of the potential forwards who could join Thornton and LeBanc, which has been a major problem for them in this series. But I was surprised that Sorensen actually gets benched in favor of Michael Haley in this game, and technically it does end up working out. Strong forecheck from Haley leads to the first goal of this game from Erik Karlsson, so I do have to wonder whether or not Sorensen finds his way back into the lineup come next game. The reason being that I didn't think Haley would really get his opportunity because, of course, while Haley is decent, he's not necessarily more defensively responsible than Sorensen. He definitely doesn't bring the same offensive edge as Sorensen, and Haley doesn't even play that many minutes. I mean, he gets, 5? He got about 6 minutes tonight, but eventually he just ends up getting benched for the majority of the game, in the third period, similar to Joachim Ryan, because he's not bringing anything defensively, he's not bringing anything offensively. So I wonder if Sorensen actually gets back game 4, or if Sharks will go with what is technically now a winning lineup back for game 4. There were also some lineup changes in the third period of this game. At times, Couture took a shift with Kane and Pavelski. Hurdle was moved down. We saw Meyer and Couture with Donskoy at times. Nyquist was moved down. It was a bunch of line juggling, something we haven't seen from DeBoer very frequently in these playoffs. I don't think anything will come of that going into the next game. I think everything will basically stay the same unless Marcus Sorensen draws into the lineup. But it was interesting to see the line juggling going on. But that will do it for this review. The Sharks will be back in action on Friday. They'll play Game 4 in St. Louis. They have now won a game on the road in this series, so they will be able to, at the very least, split in St. Louis and get back home ice advantage. Definitely a game the Sharks sort of stole in a way, as the overtime goal from Erik Karlsson definitely should not have counted. But in theory, the Sharks didn't play that bad of a game besides, I guess, the latter half of the second period that really burned them. And so it's not like entirely this game was undeserved for the Sharks, but still it does feel a bit dirty to win that one. We'll see how the Blues come out, having felt probably very much slighted after this game for Game 4. Class dismissed.